tell you the truth, and I'm never gonna stray when other women wanna play it and say that I'm a good man.
Welcome. It's another day in the life of planet Earth. Greetings, and I'm glad we're alive and still breathing and feeling good. So, my name is MCAD, and today I want to talk about the endangered fathers of America, the destruction and the war on the nuclear family. So, being a father, and a lot of this conversation for me personally was brought about by my situation in the family court and family law, that whole world, and learning about men's rights, women's rights, and the state of where we're at today, the value of fathers and the value of mothers, and what those differences are. So today we're going to be talking about third wave feminism, the Duluth Model, tender Years Doctrine, and the Violence Against Women's Act from 1994 and 2000. So we're going to talk about those few things and how they relate to the destruction of the nuclear family and fathers being endangered. So stick around. Let me know what you think. Subscribe, like, help us build this community, this understanding, and this conversation. Hopefully for all good, positive PMA, positive mental attitude, and positive solutions. Keep all things solution-based, especially when we're in dialogue, hopefully over debate, and always keep our eye on the prize and our heart centered. Lead with compassion, nonviolent communication. So if you got feedback, make sure to say it with tact, and don't be a jackass. So let's move on. Talk about endangered fathers of America. We're going to start with the Duluth Model. The Duluth Model, because the modern impact on third wave feminism and the women's rights movement and the common dialogue and conversation we hear coming from the women's movement and third wave feminists, which in my opinion is still probably the most active, visible force working against men's rights, which significantly includes family courts and child custody, as well as divorce, alimony, all that kind of stuff, obviously. In my case, I'm focused a little bit more on child custody and the discrepancy and gender bias between fathers and mothers in the family courts, and the destruction and devastation that has on the nuclear family, even in the face of separation and having to shift from marriage or a partnership to otherwise. But being an advocate for not necessarily using the state and needing privilege and licenses. So I'm not a big advocate of being married through the state to begin with. Private trusts, Massachusetts trusts, secure, own nothing, control everything. So keep it private, keep your business private, keep the public and the private separated, and we don't need the state to honor our unions. So that's kind of the place I'm starting from, which is a little different than the Judeo-Christian American traditional nuclear family, but still holding a belief that that nuclear family, to the best of our ability, is the most beneficial structure and union to raise a child and children. So that equals a value and an understanding of man, of woman, of their similarities, of their differences, of their strengths, of their weaknesses, and that includes just for each individual couple in union. Because knowledge of self, knowing thyself, is crucial to navigation with all things in this world, but especially family, building nations coming from families and communities and the collective at large, organizing, uniting over similarities or culture similarities, forming nation states, cultures, identities. So recognizing the value and the roles and knowing what your lane is. Not that all lanes are digital and not analog, meaning that, you know, they're very separated and rigid. Some certainly are, like men aren't going to perform the role of giving birth and continuing the species and the family and the bloodline. And men will have their separate roles. So there's clearly some basic biological differences for what our role and our lane is. And then as you get into society and cultures and cultural norms, and as we get into third wave feminism and movements for whether it's equality or idealistic living and philosophies that rule or guide culture and order, we have what you see today. And that's the beautiful world we live in and that we're participating in, hopefully intelligently and consciously. So history is important. And understanding the Duluth Model, you know, was in the 1980s. And I think when it really took root, Duluth, Minnesota is where this formed and the concept formed and then spread across the nation from there, which was, you know, and if you go to the Duluth, just Google Duluth Model, go to their website right now. And in understanding gender statistics, violence, abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, and otherwise, you know, manipulation, once we get into narcissists and just people that don't have good intent, that don't have good character in general, whether that's man or woman, old, young, American, foreign, you know, all the things we can start to divide and intersectionality and all of that. But there's something to be said, obviously, for logical, analytical analysis of self, culture, collective statistics at large. And that's why I think we have movements for progression, for rights, for civil liberties, and otherwise. And it's good to have these conversations. Obviously, my position when we get into third wave feminism and the lack thereof for a healthy equivalent on the other side for men's rights, that's what the men's rights movement is. But obviously in some fashions, a backlash from what feminism has now become, third wave or neo-feminism. And so the Duluth Model, I think, represents this gender discrepancy and attention toward one side, obviously, to women. If you go to the Duluth Model website and look at the wheel of violence, abuse, sexual abuse, domination, all the language, all the verbiage is directly geared only for abuse happening towards women, excluding any abuse happening towards men. And so the danger and damage of this is that then all the funding went into funding for validating, educating, awareness, tons of things around specifically female abuse. And so that's where a lot of the initial statistics came from, because there weren't anything identifying abuse going the other way, much less any sort of power structure or collective unit, movement, ideology, or otherwise advocating and supporting abuse from women to men. And so those statistics, those rehabilitation centers, those anger management programs weren't collecting data when it came to women. They were only collecting data when it came to men. And so that skews statistics. And I love statistics, and I think there's really credible and valuable independent organizations that gather statistics, credible, long-standing corporations that have given us statistics, and they're worth looking at, obviously, and including and checking sources and validating, and credibility is a big part of that. But there's also obvious intelligence to looking at how they're limited, when they're limited, where they're limited, where they're just only partial pictures. Some statistics you can only get so much demographic, if 100 people are polled versus 40,000 people, and where those people were selected from. So statistics are an interesting thing, and we just have to be mindful, just like everything. Be mindful, be analytical, be diligent, fact check, and welcome scrutiny. Welcome people that have challenges, especially that come with good intent, not trying to just debate, but truly dialogue and are truth seekers. So the Duluth Model, started a lot of these programs that were gathering statistics. The Duluth Model, and its connection to third wave feminism, is that it was totally skewed toward only focusing on women. And I'm not saying that was nefarious or any ill intent by the women that started this program. I think they were probably good intention, good-hearted humans that were witnessing in their personal experience violence and abuse, perhaps just toward women. And so they naturally started something through heart, empathy, and compassion to problem solve. And I salute that, because even with the men's rights, as I declare and as I interpret it, that's certainly our goal, is to have positive progression that serves and benefits the greatest, grandest vision of all of us. That's men, women, elders, youth, seventh generations out, indigenous ways, not just for the here and now, but 7 generations beyond. So, it's important with all healing, with all balance, with all yin and yang, with polarity, gender. That's why we have this duality and separation into positive, negative, hot, cold, male, female. That's the nature of the expression of the great mystery and creator. And so to have healing, to have education, you always want to be balanced with looking at these dualities and how they play out, especially the archetype of good and evil, of good and bad, because from the understanding or lack of understanding of good and bad comes wars and bloodshed. And we're talking about family court. That's where it's just discordance and disagreement and non-good intention, not putting your children first and truly thinking about the best interest of your child, but malice, revenge, power struggles, ego dynamics, and all these things that can truly lead to really negative and unnecessary pain and suffering and hardship, to the extent that some things you can't take back. When we're talking about parental alienation in families and in family courts, a situation where my daughter will be 4 years old, to have that time removed. And I just had a comment on just that, and the understanding that, or the lack of understanding that people truly probably have regarding what it's like in those early developmental years, at any point in your offspring, your children's lives, to have them removed from you. I mean, there's a natural progression, obviously. Your bird's got to fly out the nest and become independent and healthy and mature. So that's natural, but we're talking about early infancy, childhood development, toddler years, and much less into the school age years, if that's your thing, going into the public schools and private charter, whatever your thing is. But navigating that balance between, and obviously my end game solution, my solution for this is fit parents should never have anything less than 50-50. That should be the go-to, even in situations like mine where it's long distance and one of the parents leaves the state. We're 1,000 miles away. But that's another topic. So to stay on point, the Duluth Model, third wave feminism, and this bias toward only one voice, only healing one side of an aspect of ourselves, one side of the Merkaba, one side of the yin yang, with neglect for the other side, even in your chakras and your, mind versus emotional body. To be imbalanced with that causes imbalance, which can cause discordance in the health, physically, in the mind, mentally, in the heart, spiritually. And so having a movement like third wave feminism, like the Duluth model, that skews everything truly just in intent and focus as well. Focus is where energy flows. Energy flows where attention goes. So to focus only on certain things implies neglect of focusing on other things sometimes. In this case, certainly, I believe, up to it's 2018. And so to have the Duluth model, well-intended or not paying mind and focus, I would reference Erin Pizzey, and the first women's shelter ever created, and her understanding immediately the importance and necessity of having an equal shelter for men, and the statistics behind women abuse and male abuse, and the general equality of seeing that damage and aggression and violence and abuse and discordance is equal. We all have it. And that should be obvious to most of us. That's obvious from my life. It's like the women I know suffer, struggle. They have challenges and obstacles. They have demons and shadow selves, right? Men I know struggle and suffer and have challenges and obstacles and shadows and demons, right? That we constantly have to overcome. The indigenous story of which wolf are you going to feed, the good or the bad? It's a constant everyday thing that we have to do to be moral, ethical, good, just to be happy, to have a PMA, a positive mental attitude. That doesn't just come by rolling out of bed, putting your shoes on, and comes from waking up, giving salutations and greetings and honoring the sun and your family and the earth, and putting something of nutrition and value into your body, and taking a deep breath and showing gratitude and exhaling slowly. Right? Like centerness and health of mind, body, and true balance is a lifestyle and takes awareness and presentness and balance. And so that micro, macro, as above, so below, these same concepts apply for the polarity. And so we needed the equivalent of the Duluth model for women to men. And so the Duluth model transitions me into the Tender Years Doctrine. The Tender Years Doctrine exemplifies the same philosophy, the same mentality, the same tendency. And so the Tender Years Doctrine is a doctrine that swayed all the family custody, typical court order decisions in favor of the women, in favor of the mother. The understanding was the tender years, age 4 and below, that those years, if you had to choose, would be better spent in the time and care and hands of the mother. And so the Tender Years Doctrine became controversial, and people believed that it was a violation of the 14th Amendment and the equal protection and protection against discrimination against your sex. And when we're talking about family courts, like, we can debate the statistics on abuse and the Duluth model and the need for domestic violence shelters for women or for men, and why you might believe that women need it more, and statistically women are the victims and men are the aggressors. But I feel outside of that debate, and obviously third wave feminism, it puts the patriarch and the wicked patriarch and the damaged toxic masculinity and the wicked men, it blurs them all into the same categories, which I think is the problem with third wave feminism, the Duluth model, these tendencies to only recognize, which at this point with the information we know, I feel like has to be intentional, because there's plenty of statistics out there now in 2018 about the similarities. There's differences, obviously, just like in the manifestations of what female gender typically exemplifies and what male gender typically exemplifies. But within those, if we go outside of just the violence, and I get that the third wave feminism is saying, well, family custody law is still infected and permeated by the patriarch, and family homes are still infected and damaged by men, by toxic masculinity. And so you will see these video clips of third wave feminists.
So, number one, shut the fuck up for a second. Feminists do not want you to lose custody of your children. The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers is part of patriarchy.
Saying that they're not opposed to equal custody and they believe in shared custody, and they're not out there fighting against that and resisting the men's rights movements to try to have something far more balanced, and just being in understanding and respecting what psychology and all the sociological studies have come to determine, which is you remove the father, specifically the biological father. Like, that includes stepfathers. Like, you can't just replace a biological father. The statistics and the surveys and the studies, as I understand them, show it empirically that it has massive negative effects on little boys and little girls to remove their father, especially fit fathers that want to be active. Of course, this applies to fit mothers that want to be active too. The problem is that the tender years doctrine, the Duluth model, these things that sway everything in biased favor of women, of mothers, of females over men, neglecting not only the statistics and the tendency for women and parental alienation and all these other things to be equal across the board, but offering no protection for men, no financial support, no programs, there's no benefits for law and for, you can go into the Duluth model as well as not just the tender years doctrine, but the Violence Against Women Act, which really created, that the Violence Against Women Act created, I believe it was like $1.6 billion over 6 years in funding just for women, for women's issues, for women's rights, for family courts for women, for helping women with violence, abuse, and safety. No attention, obviously, no funding for violence, abuse, and safety for men. And so what you see is the modern age, which is women don't need men. A lot of, it's just socially, not just women, but even men have a hard time defining what the men's role is, much less speaking that with value and inspiration and admiration, right? And reverence and gratitude, with all the things that are positive, all the things you see the women out there screaming and yelling and praising themselves for, which we should be. That's the divine feminine. I've said it from the beginning of these videos, but for the last 15, 20 years, working on what I thought was progressive, greatest, grandest vision of our nation and our culture for everybody, for the elders, for the youth, for the men, for the women, for the tribe, the whole dynamic, not in homogeneity, making this homogenous, no culture, what American is going to the MTV, pop, McDonald's, surface, high fructose corn syrup, fake MSG, GMO, nothing's real, nothing's deep, nothing's authentic. It's all shopping for likes and narcissism and ego, surfaceness, while people are getting lonelier and addiction is on the rise, and the lack of true communion is real. And you can see it in the fighting from the left to the right, politically, the religious to the atheists, the males to the females, the feminists to the MRAs, the trans to the world, right? It's just these days right now, we're in crazy times. And that's why heart, intention, compassion, patience, deep breath, the middle road, the red road is important. And that's why ethical family courts are important. That's why remembering how important the family is in the nuclear family, men and women, how important we are. And defining that and declaring that, articulating it, so that we're not like, you don't speak to your children like that, like the way third wave feminism is. You don't just sit there and rain fire and spit fire on all the negatives. Like, to focus on the negative is key. It's transformation back to something positive is alchemy. That's my verse, right? Because I understand, like, to focus on negative, if you have a cancer in your body, if you have discordance, if you have a tumor or bacteria and, fungus, if you have candida overgrowth and all the things that we deal with in the gut, in the, our central nervous system that we're trying to heal just in this difficult culture where people don't even grow their food anymore. Like, that's why we're trying to bring it back to center holistically. Family's a part of that. Community is a part of that. Communion, obviously, is a part of that. And any governments that we have should reflect those values first and foremost. All the laws, all ethics and man-positive law should come from high values, the heart, common sense, wanting good for people, not wanting to dominate people, not wanting to violate the non-aggression principle, right? So to have self-determination be a high value, to have sovereignty not be a word of terrorism, but a word of honor, that reflects the great mystery, the creator. And so Tender Years Doctrine, the Duluth Model, all these things that we can point at and think of when third wave feminists are talking about the wicked patriarch and obvious systematic institutions that create white male privilege and implied brown male privilege as well. It's just male privilege. They're banging on everybody, and denying and refuse to talk about female privilege, white female privilege, brown female privilege, right? Just privilege in general. Like, to think that only one group of people has privilege is insanity. Like, there's so many different dynamics that I am in an advantage point. Just being around people I know, right? Being in my community, being on the home turf, playing music with the freedom movement here in Colorado, as opposed to some venue or some community that might not know any of the songs. Like, advantage comes from so much diversity in this world. To have such a simple conversation about white male privilege or the wicked patriarch as they scream it to the world as I see it right now, it's just a disservice to, much less screaming at people in general is a disservice to having authentic, intelligent dialogue. So we need to bring it back to center in tons of aspects of our social, political, philosophical, spiritual lives. And so the last point will be, is on the Violence Against Women Act, because I believe this trifecta, or is that a quadfecta? It's like the Violence Against Women Act, Tender Years Doctrine, the Duluth Model, and the overall presence of third wave feminism. Those four together exemplifying this gender bias, not toward the patriarch, not toward the benefit and protection and safety of men, but to the benefit and protection and safety of women. Obviously, hands down, statistically, judicially, right? You can see these cases. You can look in your own lives at men who have gotten custody compared to women who have gotten custody, men who've had to be reduced to a paycheck and child support, and women who have turned to socialism and turning the state into daddy and the bully, and a direct reflection of violation of the non-aggression principle. It's not okay just to go get the thugs in blue to force either parent out of the picture, to reduce their ability and impact to pass down their values and time and habits and mannerisms and expressions, beliefs, and turn that into a financial profiteering business, which, Title 4D and the child support, and not to mention these attorneys and the family court system at large, and adversarial family court structures that are designed to fight, designed to create discordance and fling poo at each other. And so it's unethical. The whole thing's unethical. And it stems from a history of an imbalance in a conversation that needs to be brought back to what's our greatest intent: to heal our family, to heal and have communion in the best possible dynamic we can with those who we love. And that's our immediate family and our outer circles, our communities, but also caring collectively about nations and the right for you to go be what you want to be and still have that healthy diversity that's not forced on each other, but respected for its natural creation in the development of planet Earth. And so all the funding for just the women, all the conversation of just focusing on women's problems, all the pointing and fingers on just degrading and naysaying and ivory towering against men, toxic masculinity. There's toxic everything. There's kids that are toxic. What are we talking about? There's old people. I know old alcoholics that are toxic. I know women that are so toxic, and I know men that are toxic. It's just to even imply that that is exclusive, or that your shit don't stink, excuse the language, but period. Every individual, like, we all have so much self-character development to be working on, to be out there pointing too many fingers. And those who are leading by example, your ego and your contribution to those around you should show. And that certainly shouldn't look like condemnation. I mean, if we're talking about Yeshua and, Christ anger, the time and place to be angry and lash out, of course there is, but it's simple to get angry. That's why everybody does it. It's simple to start screaming. That's why it's so tempting and so easy to default to. It's simple to cut somebody off while they're speaking. I deal with that all the time. It's hard to have patience. It's hard to do active listening consciously, especially when there's tension and anger and discordance, especially when you're in fight or flight, even on a low chakra level, and you're in survival of preservation. To have compassion in that moment while protecting self, that's a balance. You have to work. You have to get mentoring and apprenticeship. You have to read and study about that so you become good, and then you have to actively practice it so that it becomes muscle memory, and you can do it without even thinking. It's happening subconsciously, unconsciously, naturally, and you become to be kind while still having natural reflect and intuition and instinct to protect yourself when need be. Not as your first line of defense, but knowing that you got tools to de-escalate, to show compassion, to uplift, to raise the vibration, to have somebody else feel heard, have them feel safe first, to offer safety instead of needing it first, so that you can cool other people down. So the Tender Years Doctrine, the Duluth Model, the Violence Against Women Act, and Third Wave Feminism all need a little bit of healing. They all need a little bit of redirection back toward egalitarianism, toward humanism, to straight common sense PMA. Just positive mental with anything you're dealing with, and have something to contribute. It's hard to heal people. It's hard to be an alchemist for positive change. Transformation is a difficult thing. It's easy to bring people down. What's hard to do is to enlighten somebody, to challenge somebody in a way that they leave inspired and awe-stricken. That's hard, but that's beautiful. That's true artistry. That's what we should be striving for, not to make people feel belittled. I could make people feel belittled and hurt and disrespected. That is so simple. I could do that in a heartbeat. I could walk around and just ruin people's days with very little thought whatsoever. But to inspire people truly, to make them feel better when they leave you than before they got to you, that takes skill, that takes heart, that takes vision, that takes creativity. And so I want that in family courts. I want that in every aspect of my life. When I'm making music, when I'm making love, when I'm making communion with strangers. I want the greatest, grandest vision of who we are, of who I am, of who you are. That's how we have peace. Not to emasculate ourselves, not to become soft and forget that there's always going to be barbarism. There's always going to be a time for protection, a time to be strong and have strength and discipline. But to be wise with it, have wise counsel. Isn't that what it's all about? Creator, give us wise counsel so I can walk humbly with humility, but with passion and flair. You know, seeking the next frontier, being a pioneer, being courageous, live in the dynamic of riding the wave. Jacine, that's my daughter's name. It's the God wave. It's the sine wave. It's the crests and the troughs of all that is. First there was sound. And we ride that wave and we try to have balance and dignity and grace and tact with a little bit of swag. So we have fun. Life is doing the work so we can survive, have our shelter, be responsible, so that we can go out and party, celebrate with our family and friends, our loved ones, our beloveds. So that's what I want for me, and that's what I want for you. I just happen to think right now, there's a war against men. There's a blindness and a void against the honoring, the acknowledgement, the respect, the value, and the healing of men. And I want to bring that back as much as I want to offer the equal to our counterparts. I love you, women. I got your back. As long as you're not a danger to yourself and others. And even then, I'll try to act the best I can for the greatest outcome we can expect. But we got to do it together. And that means Endangered Fathers of America, we got to band together. We got to reach out to those women that are wise, that are nation builders, that are true divine feminine. We need to find them. They're out there. They're already doing the work. We know that. We just need to increase the numbers. We need to increase the knowledge and increase the vibration. Increase our own support and knowledge of self so that we have that communion. So that the mentalism and the frequency we're sending out attracts that, is that, reflects that, leads by example. So just as we didn't want the feminist movement to lower women to the lowliness that they said men were, to now where they're being crass and vulgar and disrespectful and loud and boisterous and ornery, right? We wanted them to pull men up to dignity, to grace, to kingliness, right? If we fell from our kingship and they want to be queens, they want kings up next to them. They don't want to get off of their crown and their throne and come down to the trenches and the muck. Bring us up, bring us up, bring us up. So that's the love revolution. That's why we try to come out and entertain people with the music and have a message along with it. So we can increase knowledge of self, have a good time, do the work, do the party as well. So that's why I fight for fathers right now, because I happen to think that because of models like these and institutions like these and programs and acts and statutes that have just gotten out of balance, that we need to protect fathers. We need to recognize there's a war against fathers. just as there was a war against women, just to create another tax bracket, get them out of the house and get the children out of the families into the public schools and into institutions that aren't being raised by their own elders. That's why we need to heal the families. We need to bring the family back, make it cool. Hip hop needs to be writing tracks about how cool family is. That's why we try to do that. I know some cool ass family people, some mean ass daddies and some bad ass mamas, in the connotative linguistic sense. Because they're fresh, they're good, they're beautiful people, they're beautiful families, right? So we honor them. We're trying to bring the focus back on family, on what's cool. It's cool to have some modesty. It's cool to have long-term relationships that are healthy. It's cool to be healthy yourself. Be kind, be smart. Reading books is cool. So let's bring the family back. That's my message for today. Hope it wasn't too long. Endangered fathers of America, I see you. I honor you. I value you. I respect you. And let's network. Let's support. Let's find tangible ways to problem solve that don't hurt our queens, don't hurt our women, that don't hurt families any more than they already have been, and really bring it back to center. Positive mental attitude, whether it's legislation, philosophy, bridging the gaps with actual women in your life, actual members of your community, men in your life, anybody who's acting goofy, right? To come at them with love and gracefully, softly bringing them back, keeping people in check with tact and dignity and compassion. Sometimes tough love is the way to go, but sometimes a good old hug, a good old genuine, authentic ear can do wonders, miracles. So here's to love alchemy. Here's to the love revolution. Here's to finding out who you are and expressing it in a way that doesn't violate the non-aggression principle. Be good to yourself, be good to others. My name is MCAD, aka Rad Dad. And we got music at our website, www.rhymesforthetimes.com. That's rhymes, the number 4, times.com. And we thank you for your time and energy. Let's keep it building. Peace and love.
If I could save you from ever feeling pain, I would. I'd take it all on to me. Ooh, just to see you smiling.
Purify.